All right, guys, this is Greg with the church debater and preacher Mike. Mike, how you doing today?
And I'm doing great. Today's a good day. I'm ready.
Good, good. Now, I have to mention, since both you and I are Taco Bell fans,
Yep.
have you tried the new grilled cheese burrito?
Oh, no, I haven't even heard about it.
It's basically a big burrito with extra cheese inside and then cheese melted on the top of it. So
I will have one.
yes, and I still haven't found that gluttony verse in the Bible. So until I find it, I'm going to keep eating them.
In fact, it's the other way, It's
What do you
actually,
mean?
yeah, Paul said, I buffet my body every day.
Yeah. It's funny though. We should talk about that sometime. Really, the only time it's mentioned is, what is it, in the belly? Something in the belly. But anyway, it's I'll pull it up in a future episode. But
Okay.
it's referring to other people that eat in excess. So we'll talk about that someday.
Well,
All right.
yeah.
Good news. Good news. We've got listener questions, at least for the next 2 weeks. We've got
Right.
enough to cover us for that long. So that's a good thing. I want to start by saying our first, let me mention that the email is churchdebater@gmail.com. So please, guys, send in your questions. I'm not smart enough to come up with all these on my own. And Mike's smart enough to answer any question you send.
Mike's smart enough to know sometimes there's not an answer to give.
Yes, yes. All right, here we go.
All right.
The heading for this is from Brandon. The heading on the email says he's got 5 questions. Since these experiences are more common today, number 1, a follow-up to virtual baptism.
Okay.
He says, you said you thought virtual baptisms were wrong. If somebody was baptized virtually, let's say not even coronavirus related, just out of convenience, but otherwise lives a life for Christ, do you believe it will cost them their salvation? Then he says, and if not, why do you consider it wrong? Also, would it cost someone their salvation if they lived a life fully for Christ, except that they were either not baptized or baptized in a different way, not fully immersed? All right, so what you got to say, Mike?
Well, there are at least two ideas therein. I'm going to handle the last one, the second one first. We talked about the idea of translation versus transliteration.
Yes.
The word baptize is a word that means immerse. Therefore, to say that pouring water on someone in any fashion, sprinkling, whatever, to call that a baptism is not proper. So if we would quit talking about baptism and talk about immersion, then we would have a different discussion, because then we would be saying, is it okay not to immerse someone, but rather to sprinkle? Well, wait a minute. How do you sprinkle and call it an immersion? Well, you can't.
Gotcha.
But if you say baptize or sprinkle, now people can go, well, baptism could be sprinkling. So no, it is not possible to feel comfortable, in my view, that if a person is baptized in any other way except as the word means, immersion, then I would not at all feel that that was comfortable, and would say that that does not qualify as biblical immersion. Number 2, virtual baptism. Now, the idea of virtual baptism, as I remember us talking about it, had to do with someone baptizing himself because of not being able to be around anybody else. Well,
or at least somebody maybe at their home,
yes,
baptizing them while they're perhaps watching services online somewhere. I think about that too.
Sure. Now that's certainly true. I would say this: in any time of life, the only way to live is to have a rule or to have a law, and then deal with the exceptions. You don't make a rule or a law for the exceptions and then deal with the general. That doesn't make any sense. If the Bible teaches that it's immersion, then what about someone on the deathbed that wants to be immersed and can't get out of bed? That's an exception to what is the rule. So if I change the rule for the exception, now anybody could say, well, I don't want to be immersed, but I'd like to be sprinkled. See my point? Okay. So yes, those are difficult situations. I can't deny that. But what I can say is that the only way to do what the Bible teaches is to be immersed. And everything I understand about baptism, which is a submission to God, this other person immersing you is you are submitting to them in the act, symbolizing submitting to God. Now, I can say this, if I were doing it for convenience sake, I would not at all consider that to be a wise thing to do. If it was a quarantine situation where the person was absolutely unable, maybe because of a disease, is not allowed to have human contact and is put in a bubble. Now that's an exception to the rule. I would then talk about that situation differently than I would in the generalities.
Gotcha.
And that's where I would say, so the problem comes, in fact, let me relate it to the COVID right now. Here is what concerns me. I am so glad that we have the ability to worship together separately, virtually, through whatever means.
Right.
But I am also concerned that there are going to be people who will say, this is so much more convenient than getting up and getting dressed and going to a building and being around people. And even when everything returns to normal, they're still going to sit right there and let it be a virtual assembly. That bothers me, because when you start talking about convenience as your number one goal versus doing what is a good thing to do. Now, everything we do is convenient. I mean, we meet at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning for an assembly of worship because we chose 10, but we could meet at 1 or 2 or 3 or whenever. So there's a convenience factor there.
Sure.
But that's not the main consideration. And when convenience becomes the main consideration in anything we do with the Lord, I'm really concerned about that.
Right, right. I think that's a good answer. I would also add to that, just as a side note, you just get more out of it if you see people face to face. I mean, there's something about, I think that's why I like substitute teaching so much. I get to interact with those kids all day long. Some even longer than the school day because I'm officiating their game. So there's just something different about seeing each other face to face, even outside of the worship. There's another side advantage of coming to the building and seeing one another. All right, good.
Let me make one more statement right quick.
All right.
I want to reiterate this idea. I don't believe it is my job to decide a person's future destiny anyway.
Right.
I don't decide whether a person's going to heaven or hell. And that's not my job. But I will say this, as it relates to the concept of being immersed for the forgiveness of sins, if a person is not immersed, they are lost. That's what the Bible teaches. And in that statement, I'm comfortable. And that's the only time in which I would say, okay, without this, I can say you are lost, because that's what the Bible teaches. So.
Okay. All right, good. All right, question number 2. Was it sinful for previous generations to own slaves, even if they treated them well and it was considered okay in their society at the time?
The problem, that's a great question, by the way. It's an outstanding question. The problem with the discussion of slavery is that we already have a frame of reference on the concept of slavery that has been built, this frame of reference has been built on the American experience. Now, the problem with the American experience is that's not what the Bible's discussion is about. The Bible's discussion is about bond servants. And a bond servant is a person who says, I have a debt that I cannot pay, and I need some help. And so somebody says, fine, I will be glad to pay your debt and you work it off for me, and you barter on the time period. Now, according to the terms, the bondservant works for the period of time, then it is time for that person to be released and start his or her own life. In fact, in the Old Testament, the regulations were once the person had fulfilled the contract, they could leave. But what if the person said, I'm enjoying being here. I like being here. I like being in the employ of this master. And you remember, Greg, because we sing the song, Pierce My Ear.
Right.
God said, you take that person to the door frame, put the ear up next to the door, and put a hole in the ear. And in that case, by putting the hole in the ear, that's telling everybody that this person, though still under this master, has chosen to be there. And that changes the contract from I'm paying a debt off to I'm choosing to continue to work for you, which puts it more into an employer-employee relationship. Now back to the question.
Right.
I don't believe that it was proper at any time, at any place, for a Christian to buy another person in a slave forced way. Bondservant, sure. If somebody wanted to pay your debt and you were bound to them, I have no problem with that at all. But to go to somebody's home, pull them out of their bed, put them on an auction block, and for a Christian to buy that person, no. I don't believe that ever was right. I don't care what the culture says.
Right. That's why it's difficult sometimes to even watch movies like Gone with the Wind anymore, because there were some of the slaves that may have been treated well, but they shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Well, yeah. I will say this. I am appalled at racist mentality. But I'm not sure about the wisdom of getting rid of all of the reminders that slavery existed, because we need those pictures in front of us so we don't go back to that again.
Right.
What happens in a few generations if we don't have any real reminders of how bad it was? Does it then have a chance to happen again? Maybe.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I'm going back to substitute teaching again. All the schools I've taught at, and I'm comparing them to when I was in school. All the schools that I substitute taught at, I never encountered any racist situations. Mm-hmm. The schools I taught, it seemed like all races got along together well. And maybe I just didn't see everything. So I'm not here to say that it was perfect. But then, sure enough, as we progressed during the summer, I found out that one of the schools actually had a racial issue that happened in the school. So that's a school that I had been there quite often, and I had never seen anything race related. But then, lo and behold, there comes up some kind of issue with that particular school. So I don't want to be blind to anything, but I honestly did not observe that. In fact, I felt all races. I tried to give all students equal attention. Mm-hmm. And I once went to one of their basketball games, and one of the first students to come over and hug me was an African-American student that was playing the game. So I was at least happy that I had impressed that student enough that he considered me hug worthy, for whatever else you want to say. All right. So I see you nodding your head. Were you going to say something else, or you want me to go on to the next question?
Well, I want to say this about the situation. As bad as it is, as the things that are happening around the country, I
Right.
am totally convinced that the vast majority of people are not like that. They're not
Yes.
racist on either side of the issue. They're just not.
Yes. Yes.
And I don't. I grew up in a time in Florida when they integrated schools, and I was in the sixth grade when they integrated the schools, and it was tough. It
Yeah, my
was
wife did too
it was
for her
rough.
last year. Yeah.
Yeah, it was rough. But after that, we were totally together, played on the same ball teams, hung out, good friends, came to my house. I mean, that's just life. And so I don't think that people are as bad as what this is looking like. I think
Right.
the vast majority are good, solid folk who just want to live life. And there are some ne'er-do-wells who are stirring up trouble.
Right.
Both
Right.
sides.
That's that's generally the case, no matter what the issue. We're
That's
talking
true.
about
That
racial
is true.
situations or something else.
That's true.
All right. Question 3. If someone followed the Bible
Mhm.
and followed Christ, except for the fact that they were in a gay relationship, would it cost them their salvation?
Well, once again, I'm not going to decide whether a person is saved or lost. But what I will say is this. Again, we're about this. Let's talk about what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches that Christians have do not practice fornication. Fornication is sexual activity outside of marriage. That's just what it is. I don't care if it's a heterosexual or a homosexual person we're talking about. It doesn't matter. They're the same. To be sexually active and not be married is a sin in the Bible. Number 2, the only people that the Bible allows to be married are a husband and a wife, a man and a woman. Therefore, it doesn't matter to me if the person is gay or straight. The word is still the same. If you're a man and you're a woman, you want to get married and be sexual, that's what the Bible allows. What we don't talk about is, what about two heterosexual people, a boy and a girl? They're in a sexual relationship and they're not married. Is that better than homosexuals in a relationship? No, it's the same. They're both wrong. But let's stir in something that nobody ever thinks about. You know, the whole idea of gay marriage. What happens if two men decide they want to marry this one woman and all three of them be together? What happens if some man wants to marry his bird dog? What happens if, and you just call it, it doesn't matter what it is. When you open up marriage to include something other than the Bible does, there is no stopping. Now, they can call it a marriage all they want to, but it's not. It's not a marriage. It's a union, it's a contract, don't care what it is, but it's not marriage. The Bible defines marriage. That's where I stand. Now, what you do and how you operate, I don't believe that homosexuality is a sin, but I think practicing it is. I don't think to desire to be involved in a sexual relationship heterosexually is a sin until you do it. Then it's a sin. So I admit that there are people who are struggling, and I'm sorry about that. I walked into a college class a number of years ago, and this is how I began the class. I said, I want all of you to know that your preacher is a flaming heterosexual.
Good.
And that simply means that I am attracted to women. It's just fact. But I'm married and have sex with one. And a person who is attracted to a same sex, I'm sorry, because I can't even imagine the struggle. But the attraction is not the
Right.
problem. It's the acting on it that is the problem.
Right. Right. Yeah, I've often had that thought that you just mentioned too. You know, if you feel like you have gay tendencies, I can't relate to that at all. I don't know
Yeah.
what to tell you. I mean, I
Nope.
don't have those feelings.
Mm-mm.
I can't relate to someone who does. In
Right.
fact, if anything, sometimes Christians, if not careful, will label someone just because of the way they act, like a boy who acts effeminate.
Right.
They'll make, or I shouldn't say a boy, a man who acts effeminate, might get criticized by others, and at that point, the person making the criticisms is the one that's sinning. I mean,
That's right.
so there's all kinds of different types of discussions we could have about that.
Now,
I want to try to get through these two more. I think we've got time. Go ahead. Were you going to
I will say
something
this. I'm not going to announce that a certain person is saved or lost, but
Right.
I will not give that person comfort and peace to stay in that situation, because it seems to me to be leading to a wrong place.
Right. Study your Bibles, guys. Study your Bibles. Number 4. This comes up quite often. If someone was never introduced to the Bible or Christ, such as a remote tribe in Africa, perhaps, would they still be saved? Would it make a difference if they were a good person and they lived a truly sinful life? So they don't know anything about the Bible. They don't know anything about Christ because they've been isolated all that time. They live in a remote tribe that's never heard of that, perhaps. Could they what are the requirements of being saved? Would they still be saved if they were a good person and had lived a, well, I think I pronounced that wrong. If they were a good person, or if they lived a truly good life, could they be saved? But they didn't know the Bible.
Okay. Again, that is an exception, not a rule. The rule says whoever believes and is baptized will be saved. That's what the rule says. Now, how do you deal with the exception? Don't know. God's going to deal with that. I know this. When God gave the law to the Jews, the Gentiles had a different law, but not a written law. Theirs was a law of nature. In other words, they looked around, and by their view of nature, they understood that there was a power, God, beyond them. And because of that, there are some requirements that are just generally understood, even among criminals. I mean, criminals don't walk up to each other and punch each other in the face without there are going to be some repercussions.
Right. And I was going to mention that if you didn't.
Yeah. You don't walk up to anybody, even the head of a crime family, and steal his car, because it's not right. Well, why is it not right? Well, because there's a natural law that says there are things that we understand that are right and wrong, whether we have a written law from God or not. And according to Romans 1, the Gentiles had that unwritten law, the natural law, but they were guilty because they didn't even live up to it. So is it possible that in those remote situations that God will look at them as it relates to the natural law? Certainly. It is possible. It may very well be. And it certainly, I think every Christian would say, are we going to complain if somebody's in heaven who never had a chance to be baptized and learn about Jesus? I'm not complaining. I'm just going to be there myself.
Right. That's the goal. That's not the goal. That's the comfort. That's the comfort. Comfort. All right. Last one. If it is wrong to worship God with instrumental music, could it cost someone their salvation?
Same thing.
There's an overall theme here, isn't there?
Yeah, same thing. It's not my job to decide who's saved and lost, but I will say this. And let me do this. Here's something different. Let me ask a question to the audience.
Okay.
How about somebody in the audience go to the New Testament, and just from the New Testament, teach me to be comfortable with instrumental music. That's all. Just do that. My point is, my understanding of Scripture teaches me about Bible authority. Now, sometime maybe we need to have a lengthy discussion about Bible authority, but basically it's this: permission and license granted by God. Where in the New Testament is there permission, license from God to know that instrumental music is acceptable in worship? Where in the New Testament would you turn I can turn to many passages where singing is acceptable. Now, my question then to the audience is, where is the verse in the New Testament that gives me comfort to know that God approves of instrumental music?
Good, good.
But if
It's
you choose to do it,
funny. Yeah, it's funny too, and I think I have this right. Feel free to correct me. I've always heard that the word, I don't even, I guess it's Greek. The word a cappella means in the style of the chapel, which I guess means in the early days of the church, music was a cappella. Is that a good way to say that?
well, you almost got it right, in fact.
Okay, all right, good. Well, you get it right. You get it
It was,
right for me.
it was a Latin word.
Latin word,
Yeah.
Greek, Latin. Yeah, I can't
Yeah,
spell either one of them, so
there you go. A cappella, as in the chapel.
Okay,
Even in the Catholic Church, instruments were not used in worship until after the 600s, because in the chapel, a cappella for 600 years, they didn't use it. Even
I
they.
thought you were leading. I thought you were going to keep going.
No, and the point is, you're right. That is a word that teaches the concept of singing as was done. And we know from records of the early church that they just
Right,
sang with their voices. That's what we know.
right,
Now,
right,
I'm not going to, again, I'm not going to label somebody lost because they practice instrumental music. I'm just not going to do
right,
it.
right,
I'm not going to participate in it, but I'm not going to label you for doing it.
right, right. I've run into some people, regardless of which topic we pick here, um, where hardcore, that person is not going to heaven. And,
I have seen.
we just got to remember that is not our place. I mean, that is God's place. And I'm not going to be upset if that person is in heaven with me. I'll rejoice. At least I don't know what the word is up there,
Right,
but I
right.
think I'll rejoice, along with everyone else. So I just want to be there, and we should be confident that we're going there.
Another question that someday we might want to throw in here is I think the wisdom of God is seen in the local independence and autonomy of a local church,
Right,
because there are so many things congregationally that people do differently. And that congregation of people chooses to do this, whereas this one chooses to do this. And so, what I am saying, the things that we talk about on this program are the way we do things at Richmond. That's just how it is. It doesn't mean that ours is better or worse, right or wrong. It's just this is how we do it. This is what I believe. This is what I teach. I've been here 30 years, and I know that this is how we operate, and this is what we say and how we say it. Now, how others do it and how they say, they have to stand before God on their own, and that's the key.
good, good. Good show today. I just want to remind everybody, churchdebater@gmail.com. We would much rather be answering your questions than something I come up with. Mike,
Amen.
give us some good closing thoughts before we go out of here.
I'm
And then
so anxious.
you can go get a grilled cheese burrito.
Oh, yes. Well, actually, I have redneck egg rolls coming to me. So from Sonny's, you ever had those?
I have, yes,
Oh,
I have.
that's what I'm having for lunch. But anyway, my closing statement is things are getting back to normal. I shot 80 at Kearney Hills yesterday. I'm excited.
Good, man.
Yeah.
How long had it been since you shot 80 somewhere?
We'll not be talking about that this show.
All right, guys. We will see you next week on Church Debater and Preacher Mike. See you
Bye-bye.
later.
Mm-hmm.